Another manipulation technique is isolation. Isolation is where they take a person and they put the person in an environment where they don't have other influences in that environment, only the influence of the people in that environment. And so, because of that, they only get input from the people in the environment. Now, the people in the environment can control what the isolated person reads, does, who they have as visitors. In the case of narcissism, it would be other narcissist people who sympathize or work with the narcissist, and people who are flying monkeys who have been convinced that the narcissist is a good person. So they support and back up the narcissist, and anything the isolated person tells their friends, who are the flying monkeys, the friends will pass on to the narcissist under the belief that the narcissist is a good person and will use that information for the good of the isolated person, when in reality, the narcissist will only use that information to harm the life or control the isolated person. One of the tricks of narcissism and isolation is they need to know everything that the isolated person thinks in case the isolated person starts thinking of escape. So if the isolated person tells any of their friends who are flying monkeys working for the narcissist, but the isolated person doesn't know this, the isolated person tells those people, I think I'm being victimized. And the flying monkeys go straight to the narcissist and say, she thinks you're victimizing her. And then the narcissist says, I'll deal with this. And then they just drag her up again so that she doesn't gain control of her own mind. Isolation is a lot like what happened with Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys, where Eugene Landy took over his life, took control of his bank account and everything. And in doing so, he also controlled who was able to see Brian. And what he did was he created within Brian's family and the rest of the Beach Boys group and relatives and that, and the like, a belief that Brian didn't want to see them. When in reality, Brian wouldn't have minded them visiting. And so, by creating that distancing, they weren't able to save Brian because they didn't know Brian's real situation at the time. They thought he was in good hands and that Brian didn't want to see them. He'd become a bit of a snob or something. He wasn't interested in them anymore. They mentioned with the song Kokomo how they contacted Brian and wanted Brian to be in on the song, but either Landy or Brian, I'm not sure which, said no, I'm not interested. And that created with him this belief, well, Brian's not interested. He doesn't want to do this. We won't bother with him in future activities. We'll just ignore him. And by doing that, they left him in the hands of the narcissist, where he was easily manipulated because he was heavily drugged. Isolation, I got some notes here on it as well. I don't normally do this, but I saw some good points here. Techniques may be used as separating from community, other people, trustworthy people, taking control in the handling of all the victims' resources and their property. That was the case with Eugene Landy, where he took control of Brian's money, bank account, his house, and cars and everything he had. Physical isolation from everything, controlling the victim's access to necessities. Now, oh, yeah. In Wikipedia, it says isolation, physical, social, or emotional, is often used to facilitate power and control over someone for an abusive purpose. This applies in many contexts, such as workplace bullying, elder abuse, domestic abuse, child abuse, and cults. Isolation reduces the opportunity of the abused to be rescued or escaped from the abuse. So it reduces the opportunity. When you're isolated, you're basically put in a jar. And one of the serious cases I found out about was the people isolating this girl, they created fear in her. And so she was too scared to leave the house. And it was an imaginary fear. And because she had the fear, the person isolating her played the hero, and he pretended to her he was a victim, and he was a hero. So the victim, he had to pretend he was a victim to get her sympathy, and that he was a hero, and he was protecting her from what the imaginary fear. In her belief that he was protecting her, she did everything he told her to. So she was only allowed to go out with people he'd sorted out for her to go out with. She was only allowed to mingle with the flying monkeys who'd been sucked in by him, who'd been fooled by him, and were now his partners in crime, although they were completely oblivious to the fact that they were his partners in crime. Flying monkeys are like that. They're well intended, but they have no idea that they're doing wrong when they're doing wrong. They think they're doing right. Kittens running up and down my hall. I can hear them. So, isolation. It also helps disorientate the abused person, the victim, and makes the abused more dependent on the abuser. So, by isolating the person, not letting them have full access to the world, only the access that the abuser, the narcissist, allows, creates a relationship like the Stockholm Syndrome of survival between the victim and the abuser. So the victim thinks, I need the abuser. Only the abuser can show me where to go, what places are safe, what places are healthy, what places I won't have fears. And the victim thinks that the abuser is the only safe, what would you say, door to the world. The degree of power and control over the abuse is contingent upon the degree of their physical or emotional isolation. Isolation of the victim from the outside world is an important element of psychological control. Isolation includes controlling the person's social activities, whom they see, whom they talk to, where they go, and any other method to limit their access to others. It may also include limiting what material is read. It can include insisting on knowing where they are and requiring permission for medical care. The abuser exhibits hypersensitive and reactive jealousy. This one about workplace bullying is interesting. Isolation is a common element in workplace bullying. It includes preventing access to opportunities, physical or social isolation, withholding necessary information, and keeping the target out of the loop of what's actually going on in the job. So it's happened to me where I was the only one who didn't know what was happening, and people would come and mention stuff to me, workmates, and then I'd say, "What?" And they'd say, "We've known about this for years. Don't you know?" And they'd act like I was stupid. I just didn't know because no one had told me. And those in the know had managers had gone around and told everyone else but me because they didn't like me, and so they made sure everyone else knew, but I didn't know. And then when it came to me finding out, it made me look very foolish and like I'd forgotten. I'd been told and I'd forgotten. And then if they would question the manager, they'd say, "Of course I told you. Don't you remember?" And that's a common narcissist trick where, like gaslighting, where they say, because you can gaslight in the workplace, and they can say to you, "Well, didn't I tell you?" And gaslighting is another common use with isolation, where the person is constantly led to believe that they're not capable of doing things by constantly being like the gaslighting. You keep saying, "Did you turn the light off, the gas line?" Or didn't, or whatever, just enough to make the person question their own memory and did they really do it or not? Are they an idiot? Are they a fool? Are they really right? Am I really incapable of running my own life on my own? What is wrong with me? Why am I doing these things wrong? When in reality, the victim's doing nothing wrong. The narcissist is, or the abuser controller, is using these techniques to make the victim feel that they don't, and then have control of their own mind, or that they are thick or simple. And then the narcissist comes and puts her arm around the victim, if it's female, male, and says, "I'm here for you. I know you're going through these struggles, and I know these mind issues are really bothering you, but I'm here for you, and I'll get you through it, help you get through this." And the victim just adores the captor. They just think, "Oh my gosh, I'm in such safe hands. I'm such an idiot and a fool and a twit. And look, this person, it will do anything for me. I'm in the greatest hands ever." And they just continue to be isolated and manipulated. It's a way of twisting the truth around. So always that the narcissist looks like the hero, and always the victim is in a deep adoration for the help of the narcissist. When in reality, it's a lot like the Stockholm syndrome, where the narcissist will sit down with the victim, tell sad stories, cry with the victim, have the victim hear their sad stories. Some of them might be true, and the narcissist fakes crying or sad faces and all this sort of stuff. And then the victim thinks, "Oh my gosh." And the victim's heart goes out to the narcissist that's actually controlling them. And the victim doesn't see that they're being controlled. And that's what happened with Patty Hearst when she was abducted, kidnapped. And they raped and abused her. And in isolation, she went into survival mode, terrified and frightened what they were going to do to her. And then they would sit down with her and tell her stories about their lives and how sad their life was. And her mind switched from defensive mode to survival mode, where in survival mode, her mind said, "I must do whatever it takes to survive." So she's just listening to their sad stories and hugs them and starts crying alongside them and feeling sorry for them, Stockholm syndrome, and then ends up enjoying. She ended up joining them in robbing banks and was at the side and even went to jail for it. So this is where they can take a person's mind and convince the person in isolation that the bad guys are the good guys and the good guys are the bad guys. So to her, while she was robbing banks, her father and her family and the police and everything were bad guys, not to be trusted. Keep away from them. We're the good guys, they're the bad guys. And isolation is the opportunity of taking a person's mind, twisting the truth around, and getting the person, even with the help of drugs, hypnosis, hypnotic thinking, coercion, and the person finally gets to a stage where they're believing everything they're told by the narcissist. through very intimate control and long-term conviction of what is not right to being right and what is wrong to being right. So if you're in a situation, you see someone, and in that position too, to get the flying monkeys to believe that the narcissist is a good person, the narcissist will drug up the victim, if the victim's on medical care, mental health care, in isolation, say in a house, they will the victim will be manipulated, and all the times that the flying monkeys don't see the victim, and the flying monkeys will be told that the victim is into mental health care. The victim is terribly terrified of a person, or an agoraphobia, a phobia of some sort, or of even walking out of the house without protective care, and they assume because the victim is in a drug state or terrified or anxious or depressive or even suicidal, they assume it all comes from the fears, the imaginary or real fears of the victim, and not because the narcissist is playing with the victim's mind. Gaslighting, Stockholm syndrome, putting the victim into survival mode. Once you see someone and you see the person and you like it with a title, like with Eugene Landy and Brian Wilson, everyone assumed because Eugene Landy had a title as a therapist and he'd done his studies at university that he could be trusted. So once they saw him as a trusted person, when it seemed like Brian didn't want anything to do with anyone, they assumed they could trust Eugene, but they couldn't trust Brian. Brian didn't like them anymore. Brian wasn't their friend anymore. Brian had turned his back on them, when in reality, it was a manipulation from Eugene Landy. He's a therapist who knew how to manipulate people and knew what drugs to use to control and keep a person down from their alert level. So your alert level's here. They dumb you down to about here. When you're dumbed down to here, you can't completely think for yourself. You're not completely in control of your facilities, your mental capabilities, and therefore you can't escape the situation. And to people on the outside coming into the home and looking at you, you seem normal. You can function. You can do the housework. You can clean. You can look after children. You can do this. You can do that. And also, the narcissist can tell the victim, if you don't behave when your friends come up, if you don't obey what I tell you, you don't behave, you they can get so scared they can have you put away in a mental asylum. So the narcissist creates a divide between the friends and the victim, and so this wall of fear there for the victim, of their friends, and so therefore the victim will never get close to their friends, and therefore they won't tell their friends, certain things and that, which the narcissist doesn't want them told. So it works in a collective way where the narcissist is controlling everybody. Group narcissism, group control. And the victim stays in isolation, in control, and is unable to get out, mainly because everyone around the narcissist supports the narcissist. And that's, the difficult part too for the victim. The only real way, I think, possibly for the victim to get out is like what Brian Wilson did, where um, he realised he was being drugged, and then he got himself out of it. He approached people. So that's isolation and manipulation.